Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wildcard Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ben Pulowski. I'm a Senior Learning Center trainer here at Geotab, and today we are going to be taking a deep dive into zones. So we're going to be looking at some of the basics of zones, some of maybe the lesser known features and things that you can accomplish by using zones. So with that, let's go ahead and we'll jump in here today. So this is what we're going to be looking at. Going to start with just a little bit about zones, sort of understanding exactly what they are and exactly why they are beneficial or how they can be. We're going to look at creating individual zones. We're going to look at bulk uploading zones, editing and deleting, mass editing. We're going to take a look at how zones and groups work together. We are going to look at some zone-based rules. And finally, we are going to take a look at a lesser-known report, which is the customer visits report. So starting off with just about zones. So zones are a virtual perimeter. It's a saved location is really all that a zone is. So it's a perimeter or fence around a geographical real world area. So any area that you want to demarcate. So some examples that you might use of zones, places of work, customer sites, drivers' homes. You can use it for vendor locations or job sites or really anything under the sun that you can think of. But at its core, all a zone is it's a saved location. Now, when you have zones added into your database and you're able to record that data, there are a few different things that you can do. A big one is establishing driver accountability. So having an understanding of how the drivers are spending their time, or having a more detailed understanding of that. Increasing productivity, which is one of our 5 pillars of innovation. So being able to ultimately make your business more effective. Tracking high value assets. Understanding what types of stops that they are making. Again, identified landmarks or areas of interest used to categorize and identify locations such as offices, customers, vehicle yards, or homes. The big word here, in my mind, is categorize. It's if you ever want to be able to compare this type of stop against this type of stop. Without zones, you lose that ability, or to isolate certain types of stops and to be able to report on those. And again, it all goes back to productivity and increasing that efficiency, increasing that productivity. So that's actually all we have for the slides here today. The rest of the webinar is going to be demoed for you within the database. So we're going to start simple here. We're going to start slow and just start by creating a zone. So to create a zone, you can start from the map screen. And from here, you can zoom into the map, or you can search by address. So for example, I can come up here and to the search bar, and I can punch in an address. Now I can click on this address from the dropdown, and it brings me right here. So now from here, I can go ahead and I can start making my zone. Now, it's always a good idea to switch your map into satellite view when you're making a zone. And the reason for that is you want to be able to make sure that you're capturing the place where the vehicles actually park. So for example, if you look at this building right here, this is the parking lot over here on the right. If I'm just in normal map view and I can only see the building, and I don't know if you can tell that, but it's entirely possible that I could actually miss the parking area. So again, a good tip is to go into satellite view for this. As I mentioned, you don't have to search by address. You can also just zoom right into the map. So what I'm going to do now is click on this button up here that says Add Zone. And I'm going to draw my point. So you can see the mouse here turns into crosshairs. And I can just click. And I can click around here and back over here. And what I'm doing is I want to make sure that I'm capturing all the places where the vehicles could conceivably park. So here's the parking lot here, but maybe they might park on this street one day or over here or on the other side of this street. So you want to take that into account when you are making your zones. When I am happy with it, what I can do is I can click back on the first point that I made, and that's going to close off the zone, and it's going to bring me to this screen. So I will name this profoundly office zone. The next thing that I have below the name is publish to groups. Now, this is something that we are going to spend a little bit of time on later today in the webinar, because this doesn't do what a lot of people assume that it does. What this has to do with, briefly, is it has to do with zone visibility. It has nothing to do with what data you're recording or recording data for only vehicles in the groups. No, it's nothing to do with that. It's really only if you want to prevent users from seeing certain zones. Again, more on that a little bit later. Below that, we have our comment field. So that could be whatever type of reference you want to put in there. Maybe it's an address or a phone number or customer number or anything like that. Visible on map is just that. If you still want to be collecting data on a location, but you don't want it to be seen on the map, so you have that option. Down below, the next one, you have types. This is one of the most helpful features of zones, where it allows you to categorize what the zone type is. And it's so useful for reporting. And it allows you to look at only customer zones or only office zones and compare stops within those zone types. So if I want to compare driver A against driver B, how long they're spending at customer locations, or how long they are spending at the office during work hours, when ideally they should be out on the road. So we'll select our zone type. Take note here is that when I click on this box and then I click on office, it adds it. So you want to make sure, as I do here, that you only have the zone type in here that you want. Indicate stops within zone is that it sort of treats it like a non-zone stop. We don't highlight it in the map screen. Usually when you stop inside of a zone, it'll highlight it, underline it on the map screen in the trips history report. It's not going to do that. So it's sort of similar to visible on map. Below is the color and the transparency. Now, this system will automatically define this for you. If I have, for example, an office zone versus a customer zone. So it changed from, I guess, a lighter to a darker orange there. So you can also, create your own colors or do whatever you want, but the system does auto-define it. Finally, you have down here at the bottom end date. Now, again, this doesn't do what a lot of people assume that it does, which is to say it does not delete the zone. All it does, it is you can put in when it will stop recording data and recording interactions with that zone. So if I have workers at a temporary location and I know they're only going to be there for 3 days this week, I can maybe set this to a week, and then I'm not going to see that data anymore after that. So I'll just leave this set to never, so it'll keep collecting this information for us. When I am happy with everything here, I'm going to click on save, and it's going to bring me back to the map screen. And again, here is my zone that I have created. Now the zone is created, and I'm going to start recording data when vehicles stop inside of here. I want to go back to my zones list here for a second. So under zones and messages, zones, this shows a list of all of the zones that I have in my database. So I have all these zones listed over here on the left. If I have any comments, those will show here. And I have my zone types. So this is a customer zone. This is an office zone. These are all customer zones. And then we also have the assigned group. So these zones down here are assigned to the users group. These are assigned to the company group. This guy up here is assigned to maintenance. Up at the top, you have this button right here that says types. So I mentioned this a moment ago when we were creating the zone, how you can assign different types to zones for reporting purposes. You have 3 zone types that are built into the database by default: customer, home, and office. Those are always going to be there. But what you can do from this screen is that you can actually create additional zone types. So if I wanted to create a zone type, and I'll call this vendors. Now, when I go back into my zones list, under types, I now have vendors listed, so I can use that as well. And that comes back later when we get into reporting. So, of course, you can always create your zones one at a time. You can also do a bulk upload. So in order to do that, under zones and messages, I would go over here to import zones. And when I get to this screen, I actually see 2 different basically templates that I can use to import my zones. There's 2 different examples here. You can do a coordinate-based import, which uses the latitude and longitude coordinates if you have them. Sometimes that's all that you have. Or you can do an address-based import, which is what people are going to do most of the time, but you can do either option. What you're going to do is you're going to format your spreadsheet based off of whichever template you're going to use here. And you can take note here, each row of the Excel table is a zone. You don't need a header in your Excel file. So you don't need to have name, latitude, longitude. You don't need to put any of that in there. Here is a sample Excel file that I have put together for you, and I'll try and sort of line that up so you can compare. So again, there's no header here. I just put in the information. I'm going to hide this row right here and make this a little bit easier to read. So this would be an example of an address-based import right here, where I have the name of the zone, I have the complete address, right? Street address, city, state, zip or postal code, just put it all in there. Next, I have a reference. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Over here, so now I'm in column D. I have my comments. Is the zone circular? Yes or no? So if I say yes, it'll be a circle. If I say no, it will be a square. The advantage to that is that squares are much, much easier to adjust later on. If you find a zone isn't big enough, it's easy to enlarge a square. Circle, you have many more points, and that can be a little bit more cumbersome. I'll show you that a little bit later. Finally, we have the diameter of the zone, or corner to corner, if it is a square. So this is controlled by whatever measurement system you're using within your user profile. I am set to imperial, so this is 250 yards. If you're set to metric, this would be 250 meters. 250 is usually a pretty good starting point. Always a good idea to aim high, because again, you want to make sure you're capturing all the places where your vehicles are being parked. It's much better to have the zone too big than to have it be too small. Now, I want to go back to this reference for a second, because this is another piece of information here that we very rarely get into. What a reference is, it's essentially a hidden comment. So I can put my comments here in column D, and they're going to populate within right here where we have this comment field, right? And it's right here within the zone page. What the reference does is it sort of is a way to bring data into some other reports. So I'll show you exactly what I mean here. I'm going to go here and I'm going to run a trips history report. And I'm just going to run it for today. And I want to get this into Excel. So I'm going to download this. So here I have my report in Excel. I am going to come down here and I'm going to unhide, and I'm going to go to the Data tab. So this is definitely some more advanced stuff that we're doing here. This is getting into custom reporting, and we have plenty of resources available on our YouTube channel to assist you with this. But just bear in mind that this is some more advanced information. So now I'm in my data tab here, and everything in the report tab is referencing what is in the data tab. So if I click on this tab or this cell right here, it's actually referencing this cell in the data tab. And it's true for any cell that I click on. It all points back to here. Now, you never want to make any changes to the data tab. It's there for you to pull data from. And I'll say that again, you never want to make changes to the data tab. And we have all the data in here: device name, device group, user, all that stuff. We have trip start time, trip duration, and if we keep going down here to the right, we have these two columns. We have column T and we have column U. Now, under column T, we have location zone types. So it's identifying this stop is in an office zone, this stop is in a home zone, this stop is in a customer zone. This column U is the external reference. So that's what that does within our zone import, meaning that I can put something in this cell right here related to this zone. Any piece of information that you need to be able to reference. And now I can bring whatever that information is into, for example, a trips history report or a customer visits report. So it's a way to bring in additional data that might not be there. This does not only apply to the trips history report. This is just one I'm showing as an example. Pretty much any report having to do with location or zones is going to give you the option for this zone external reference. So if you need it, it's actually a pretty powerful tool. And if you do a lot of custom reporting, it will certainly be able to assist you with that. So that's what this looks like for the address-based import. I'm going to unhide this one here, and we'll show you now the coordinate-based import. So now I'm following this top example here. So name of the zone, latitude, longitude, reference, comments. Is the zone circular? I'm going to say yes to this one and make it circular. And then I have my diameter. Now, I have my zones in here, and I actually learned this in researching for this webinar, that you can mix and match. So we can actually have these two different zone import types happening simultaneously, and the system will be able to pick up on that. So we can import both the address-based zones and the coordinate-based zones in the same spreadsheet. Now, what I am going to do now is I'm going to add in this, I'm going to call this invalid zone and just throw in some gobbledygook. And now I will save this. And I'm going to, back here in the database, click to browse and bring this file in. So a couple things that I want to point out here. So we have two categories here. We have 3 total zones. We have valid zones, of which there are 2. And we have invalid zones, of which there is 1. I can click on either of these to expand it. So it's going to say, yep, we found these. We understand where to put these zones. In my invalid zones, it's saying, we don't know what this is. We can't find this address. And what I can do is I can come right in here and I can correct this address if I want to. Or say that you have 20 invalid zones. What you can do is you have this Excel icon over here on the right. You can use that to download a spreadsheet, and it's going to show you, just basically spit out all of your invalid zones, right? So it gives me the zone name, it gives me what I put in for the address, and then my reference and my comment. So I can take this and I can address those zones individually. But it's going to exclude those zones from the import. So next step is I am going to, actually, there is, before I import, there is one other thing that I want to show you here. Up in the upper left, you have this button that says options. This is another tool that's very powerful and actually pretty rarely used. What this is going to be used for the most part, is to assign zones to groups or to assign zone types to your zones that you're importing. Now below this, you have the size, you have the color, you have the visibility, the shape, and we have all these other different options that we had when we made our first zone. Now, what I want to point out is that what you have in here is not going to override what you put in your spreadsheet. So for example, this Geotab USA zone that I'm making, is the zone circular? No. So it's going to be a square zone 250 yards across. If I change this to 1,000 yards and change it to a circle, it's still going to go with what's in the spreadsheet. So what you could actually do is basically leave those cells blank, and you could assign it through here, which is why I say, again, really only used for groups and zone types. So for example, I want to call these office zones. Actually, I am doing this in the wrong database, so I'm going to pop back in here for a sec. So under my options, I am going to get rid of customer, and I'm going to call these office zones. I hit apply changes, and now I can click this upload button here, and it's going to import the zones. Done. I go to my zones list, and here are my two zones that I just imported. I have the name of the zone. I have the comment that I left. Here's the type as an office zone. And then if I were to run a trips history report, once I have data, I'm also going to get those references that I pulled in as well. So if I want to view these zones on the map, what I can do is click on I can actually click on this location icon right here on the right. This is going to bring me right to the map screen. It's going to show me where I created this zone. Now I can see here right away, I actually missed some of the parking spots around the building. So what I would want to do is I would want to click on the zone and go to change zone shape. When I do that, I can now drag these points around, and I can make this a little bit bigger. I also have the ability to add in additional points. So right now I just have these 4 points. It was a square. If I click on the border, and you can see there how it becomes much larger when I mouse over it. If I click right on the border, now I have another point, and I can drag that down and wherever I need it to, and then I can hit save. And it's going to update the shape of my zone. Now that was a square zone. Mentioned before that you also have circular zones. So I'll show you what I mean. Here is the zone that we created for Geotab headquarters. So it is a circular zone as promised, but it looks like the lat long coordinates were a little bit off. This is actually the building right here. So click on the zone, I go change zone shape. And it's a lot harder to move this zone than it is going to be to move a square zone that only has 4 points to it. Of course, I mean, you can do it. It's just going to take a little bit of effort, and it is going to be more time consuming. So keep that in mind. You can do circular zones, but if you need to make adjustments, definitely not ideal. I can click on the zone, and I can go here to edit zone. It's going to take me back to this main zone edit screen. I can also delete the zone. So if I go here into my zones list, click on the zone, I can do remove right up here. I can also, from the map screen, if I click on the zone, this third option down is remove zone. Below that, we have dispatch vehicle here. Now, this is typically going to be used with Geotab Drive. And what you can do with this, I'll jump back here into my other database that I'm using. is that I can, again, from the map screen, click on it, dispatch vehicle here. And it brings me to this screen where I can now send this zone to a device. So if I choose this device from the list, I can also send it to drivers, or I can send it to groups, compose message, and I can send that zone. What this is going to do is that now within Geotab Drive, it's going to show up as a message, and it'll also create an active link in Geotab Drive, which you can then use to navigate through Google Maps. So again, that's a useful feature, and you can do this right from the database and send a location right to a driver if they are using Geotab Drive. In the zones list, I do want to point out that there is a bulk edit tool that you have built into the system here. And it's this little drop down right up here in the corner. So I can select visible, or I can select individual. If I select visible, it's going to select all of the zones. Or if I select individual, I can just choose a couple of them. So maybe instead of office zones, I want to edit these and change them to a different zone type. So I've selected these two. Up at the top, I can remove selected zones, or I can edit selected zones. I can publish to groups, visible on map, zone types, indicate stops, color, and end date. So I want to change the zone type. And it's going to replace with. So it's not going to add on a zone type, it's going to replace the zone type. That matters when you get up here to something like groups, where add group is doing just that. It's adding on a group to whatever is already there. Replace is going to wipe everything clean. So I want to replace with, we'll call these vendors. Hit save, accept, and here we go. So these two are now assigned to that vendor's type. And again, it's this little guy right here in the corner. You also have, not related to zones, but while we're here, you also have this same bulk edit tool in your vehicles list, in your users list, and you can also use it for editing hours of service logs in bulk. So helpful tip for you. So I mentioned zones and groups earlier. So when you assign a zone to a group, again, you're not changing any of the data that's being recorded. So the assumption is when I create this zone, I'm going to select this group, and now it's only going to record data for vehicles in that group. That's incorrect. The groups controls who can see the zone. It hides the zone from users who have been assigned to a different group. So I'll show you exactly what I mean. We have a lot of zones here in, actually, let me sort this by group so you can see that a little bit more clearly. So we have these zones here that are all assigned to the company group. We have these two zones assigned to the maintenance group, and we have these at the bottom that are assigned to the users group. So let's say that I am a user who belongs to the maintenance group. To simulate that, I'm going to go up here to my groups filter, and I'm going to put on maintenance. I no longer can see the zones in the users group. Those zones just don't exist. They won't even display on the map for me. What I can see are the zones that are assigned to the group that I am in, which is maintenance, and the zones that are assigned to a company group. Same thing if I come up here and if I were to put users. Now I can no longer see the maintenance zones. So it allows you to see the zones that are in your group and any zones that are assigned to the company group. So vehicle stops inside of zones, they just won't show up, and no effect on the data that we're recording. It's all still going to be there. I want to go next into zone-based rules. So I'm going to head over here into rules and groups, and I'm going to click on rules. And up at the top, I'm just going to click on this button that says add. And I can use this to create rules around interactions with zones. So name, I'll just call this custom zone rule, another profound name for you. Publish to groups. Now this again does work as you would expect, where this controls, whoops, take off my groups filter here, where this does control what groups the rule is going to apply to, of course, your comment. Next, you have conditions. I can add zone or zone type, and I have two options here. I have zone and I have zone type. So zone is specific individual zones. If I want to create a rule that applies just to this zone. But you also have zone types. And this is where you can do some really good stuff that can help your productivity. Customer do not enter home office vendors. Another reason to set up your zone types and utilize those. So let's say I want to do a customer zone, and I have entering, exiting, outside, inside, and stopped. So entering and exiting are instantaneous events. It's the process of crossing the border into that zone. If you want data as to how long they're spending in zones, probably don't want to use entering and exiting. You may want to use that for a do not enter type zone, or if they have an assigned territory, that would be great reasons to use it. I want to do inside. You also have inside and you have stopped. Inside is counting all time that it's inside the zone for. Stopped is only the time that it's stopped. And actually, I'm going to use that instead. So if they are stopped inside of a customer zone, and I will say, I'll add a duration to that, and I'll say 60 minutes. And maybe this is something where once they've done this, I want to receive an email that lets me know that this driver has stopped for too long. They shouldn't be stopping at customer locations for this long. And you can apply this to all of your different zones and all of your different zone types. I'm sure you can imagine there's many different applications for this. So you can build this to suit your particular needs, and then you can report on it. After you've created this custom rule, it's now going to be listed here within your custom rule. Here's our zone custom right here at the bottom. Here's another one that we created, entering a do not enter type zone. And I can report on these by running an exceptions report. And then you can do more complicated things and get into custom reporting and sort of customize your own sort of zone visits report or whatever data it is that you want to monitor. The last thing that I want to show you in the database here today is the customer visits report. This is an extremely useful report. Have to jump back here. So when I go to my customer visits report, first thing, it's going to ask me to select my vehicles. I'm just going to do select all. And what this is showing me is it's showing me stops inside of zones. So the vehicle has to stop inside of the zone in order for it to show up in this report. And by stop, I mean our specific definition of a stop, which is either the ignition is turned off or the vehicle does not move for 200 seconds. What I'm ultimately trying to say here is that if you're trying to measure when a vehicle passes through a zone, this is not the report for you. This is going to show when vehicles stop in a zone. So we have the vehicle. This is the name of the zone. We have the time of arrival. So arrived at April 9th at 11:32 and 55 seconds. It was stopped in this zone for 20 hours and 28 minutes. And then over here, time of departure, which is when they left the zone. If I click on this location icon over here on the right, it is going to show me the route that this vehicle took to arrive at the zone. And I can view the breadcrumb trail for that. If I go back here, get back to my customer visits report, the next entry that you have here in the list, it says duration of 0 seconds, which means that this vehicle is currently stopped inside of this zone. Up at the top, you have your options. So I can look at my date period. So I'll look at yesterday. I can look at historical data. If I'm maybe going a little farther back in time, I want to view data for vehicles that are now historic. I can view by vehicle or by driver. So if you are using some sort of driver identification mechanism, if you're using NFC readers or Geotab Drive, then you can run this by driver. Otherwise, you want to leave it set to vehicle. And then finally, you have zone types. So I can run this report for customer zones, for example. And now I can run this for specific zones, or I can run it for all customer zones. And now from here, I can change the view, for example, and I can set this up for summary or detail. So depending on the level of detail that you're looking for within the report, and I can export this into Excel and I can play around with the data. This is also a report where you have these same options here if you want to automate the report. So if I go here into my reports list, and I'm going to go to my customer visits, and I'll do the advanced detail. So now, say I'm setting this report up to be emailed, and you go through all this stuff, which I'm going to skip over, and down at the bottom, you have run report by, and you have zone types. So for example, if I wanted to get a daily report that shows me stops inside of customer zones, I can do that. Stops inside of office zones, or I can get into custom reporting, and you can create some really interesting dashboard graphs with this, comparing the stops in different zone types or comparing drivers. So the limits are pretty endless here as to what you can do with all of this data. So that's going to wrap up the formal presentation. We're going to take some questions here. Shay, do you have any questions that we'd like to read?
We absolutely do, Ben. So the first one I have here is, when you're creating zones, should the user take into consideration GPS accuracy, or did the zones themselves automatically increase the boundary?
Ooh, that's a good question. So you take into account GPS accuracy. Probably a good idea, but that's sort of why I say aim high on the zones. It's always better to have a zone that's too large than a zone that is too small. There is, if you are the programmer type, and if you go into our SDK tools, and you can find them at my.geotab.com/SDK, and I'll put a link to this in the chat. There are some tools and examples here that you can use where it will, I want to say there's one that will sort of auto adjust the size of the zone based on where the vehicles are stopping. I'm not a programmer, so I'm not the one to offer a ton of information on that, but I believe that that is an option.
Perfect. The next question we have is, what happens if you import a spreadsheet for the bulk upload and you have the same information more than once?
Sure, good question. What's going to happen is that you're going to have two identical zones laid on top of one another. Nothing is really going to happen, but it's not going to reject the duplicate zone.
And also for that bulk upload tool there, for the zone, the external reference cell, could you provide an example of what that could potentially be used for, what its purpose is? Is it more of a free form string and text field?
It is. I'll give you an example of this is something that a report I had to build in the past for a customer, where she was looking to build a very specific report based on the mileage that her drivers were driving, but we had to separate distance between their home and distance between the office because that was deducted for tax purposes or something like that. I don't remember the circumstances, but what we needed in the report was some sort of constant value to be there that would show the mileage from this driver's home to the office. The way that we ended up accomplishing that was by using the vehicle comments field. So for every vehicle, we had a number in here. If this driver's home was 12 miles away. In the same way that you can use the zone reference, we could now bring this data into a trip's history report and incorporate it into the formulas. And it could even be something simple like you want a customer reference number to display on a trip summary report. And it could be something like that. It doesn't have to be some crazy formula. So definitely can be freeform.
Perfect. When you're using the import zones options for circular zones, is the distance the radius or the diameter, just for clarification?
Sure, it's the diameter.
And then can you back up and export old zones?
Can you export old zones? Well, you can. You can download a list of your zones here, but this isn't really. It depends on what you're looking for. If you're sort of trying to do a reverse zone import, where you can then like get back the addresses and the diameters and all of that, boy, you might be able to do something like that with one of the SDK tools. That's a maybe. But if you just want to download a list of zones, you can do that right from your, I did that without explaining what I was doing. I just went to my zones list here and I changed the view. And then I hit the Excel button. And then this gives me something like this. Now that I'm looking at this report a little bit more closely, it does have the center latitude and longitude within this report. It doesn't have the size of the zone, but it does give you a location.
What happens when you set an end date for a zone to expire? Does it become historic or is it entirely removed from the database?
Sure, it's not removed. The zone is still going to be there. It's still going to be in the list. It's still going to be on the map. All it's going to do is it's going to stop recording data. It's not going to worry about recording vehicle interactions with that zone anymore. So the example I gave a little bit earlier was I have drivers at a job site and they're only going to be working there for the next week. Well, maybe down the line in a couple months, they're going to have to go back there, but it's for different reasons, and I don't care about that data. I could basically, when I set this to end date, it's just that. It's saying I want to ignore this data. I don't need it anymore.
Awesome. Next question I have here. Is there a specific report that a user would run for usage of zones for IFTA off-road reporting?
Oh, wow. A specific report a user would run for IFTA off-road reporting. Not off the top of my head. That's an outstanding question, though. That's a good one. I'd say you want to reach out to your reseller or account manager or whoever you normally deal with. We can get that question in front of people who know more about it than I do.
All right. Next question I have here is, with the customer visits report, is there a way to show the zone with all of the vehicles inside the zone instead of showing each vehicle separately?
Okay, so when we run our customer visits report, we're just going to start over. Customer all zones. Okay. So when we run our customer visits report, it's sorted by vehicle, and then it lists the zones that this vehicle stopped inside of. Up here at the top, you have this sort by button. And if I click on the drop down, I can sort by name, zone, or duration. So I just click on zone, and now it shows me, sorts it by the zone and shows the vehicles that stopped inside of it.
Alrighty, last question we have here is, can a report be set up that reports the duration from the time of dispatch to the zone And how would the system know the time of dispatch?
So measuring the time of dispatch to when they arrive at the zone. Is that the question?
Yes.
Off the top of my head, you could do it, but it would take some good Excel chops. And again, this is off the top of my head, and there might be an easier way to do this. What you could do is you could create a custom rule for, well, if it's a dispatch, I'll follow up with that person after the webinar, and I'll see what I can find out on that.
All right, perfect. So it looks like we are all set, Ben.
All right. Well, thank you, Shay, and thank you to all of you for attending today. Hope that you got something out of this, and we hope that you have a great day, a great week, and we'll see you at our next Wildcard Wednesday. Thanks, everyone.